Welcome to the first in the We Are Agentic podcast series, where we're going to be talking to thought leaders, industry experts, and a whole host of guests on AI, where they are on their AI journey, and the AI maturity curve. So, EJ, welcome to the We Are Agentic podcast. It is a great pleasure to have you on the show. Just before you return to the Silicon Valley for your next big chapter in life. But what we want to talk about today is chapters that have gone before, and all of your experience and everything that has gone there. And so we know you were one of the early pioneers with AI training and adoption, having really founded HSBC's Office of Applied AI. And so to begin with, we just want to get a sense of who you are, your background, really how you got to this point and how you got into AI in the first place, because it's not actually a very natural path that everybody finds themselves in. And so let's begin there.
Right. Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Very grateful for the opportunity. First thing, got to do the gratuitous but necessary disclosure.
Yes.
Everything I say is, my personal view, certainly not representative of any of my former employers, and certainly not the soon-to-be announced, future employer. But really, it's kind of, I guess some observations and great learnings, of things that have gone well and gone not so well, over, I guess, now a 2-decade plus career. So I'm happy to kind of share that with you, and ultimately, hopefully, that will, create some great value for both, you guys and ultimately your customers and people listening today.
So in terms of the beginnings,
Sure.
let's say, so you actually, interestingly, are a qualified lawyer. You passed the bar exam and you started there, but have got to this point in your career that is really quite far from that, or maybe there are some transitions into that. But tell us a little bit about how you got here.
Sure. To go even further back in time, I guess, and I think you'll find this to be a common thread across a lot of different builders. It's just something that's always been a fabric of my life. And I was very fortunate, growing up with parents who really encouraged that, to the point where, and I'm certainly dating myself, but in, the early to mid, 1980s, I was the kid, with the Apple IIe and the dual disk drive with a whopping 128K and a green monitor, helping my father, with business process automation, which fundamentally meant I was printing out, mailing labels, for his small business. But again, that theme of, learning, being on the edge, doing fun things, that's really kind of always been with me, even, when I was, a young child. Yes, I'm a reformed lawyer. I went to law school, which is where I met my amazing and lovely wife of nearly 25 years.
Wow.
We're about to celebrate our anniversary, actually coming up in a few days. But I went to law school knowing that it was effectively an intellectual toolkit. Interestingly enough, I studied a lot of computer law there and intellectual property and kind of, business law. But I knew I never wanted to be a lawyer. But I also knew those types of skills would help me build cool things, like figure out how to work with people, figure out, basically the contours of negotiation and kind of managing relationships at a very kind of structured level. And so, I graduated from law school, and my wife went on to go, practice project finance. I passed the New York bar, but at that point in time, I didn't practice. I actually started my first of 2 startups, one of which was successful, the other of which was not, and that's okay, 50-50. And to make a long story short, ultimately found myself with an amazing nearly 15-year career at Bank of America, where ultimately I was very privileged to ultimately, Bank of America moved me out and my family out to San Francisco in the Bay Area in 2010, where ultimately I was responsible for the retail digital product portfolio. And then just because you meet amazing people along the way, one of my great mentors and people who really inspired me professionally, He actually left Bank of America to go to HSBC. I followed him, never looked back. He's an incredible friend and mentor, to this day. And then ultimately came to London a few years ago, where I was most recently the group head of generative artificial intelligence capabilities and the founder of the Office of, Applied Artificial Intelligence. And a few months ago, decided it was time to kind of do something new, and back to San Francisco and Silicon Valley we go. So
that's fantastic. And I mean, the move to HSBC. So before that, you weren't really in the AI space at Bank of America.
I was.
Oh, you were.
So, and this is probably more semantics than anything else, but everything is almost semantic at this point. Like, part of that retail digital portfolio was the early stages of, what would be known as artificial intelligence in the context of banking. You could have called it conversational AI. You could have called it, machine learning. And again, as we know, and as of others, in this space, with far greater expertise, have said, AI and ML have been with us, for decades.
Yes.
So it has started to kind of creep in more in the enterprise setting more and more over the last, 30 or 40 years, and certainly the last 10 to 15 years, and certainly now, which I know we're going to speak to. But you could say that while there, one piece of that portfolio was the very, very early stages of how to bring, high quality, responsible, kind of consumer conversational artificial intelligence, to customers, which clearly now many, not only banks and financial services companies, but many different types of sectors are kind of deploying. So yeah.
So you, as I said in the introduction, you were really one of the pioneers in this space. And being a pioneer in this space is somebody who even got into it 2 years ago, but you got into it many years ago, and have actually scaled across an entire organization, the size of HSBC, a multinational organization. And so you've really seen it grow from an embryonic stage to being able to adopt AI across an entire organization. And that is a story that, I mean, you could probably write a book about it.
But I'm not.
But not now.
To be very clear, I'm not writing a book on that. Yeah.
But what I would love to know is just what was that journey like?
Sure.
What did you learn?
Sure.
Because there must have been lots of mistakes along the way as well, in something that no one had ever ventured into before, no one had ever done, and you were pretty much feeling your way through that journey.
Sure. It's a great question, and it's a very important question to be answering right now, not just in the context of banking and financial services, but I think with a lot of organizations, both large, complex multinationals to, across all sectors to, Main Street or High Street, small business owners who are really trying to understand this as well. They see it at the dinner table. They see it in the news. They might see their competitors using it. They might, unfortunately, be the victim of fraud on the other side of it. So this is no longer, something that exists, in university research labs or defense departments or, enterprise innovation centers. This has now really transcended all of that. The barriers to entry have come down, and it's very much something that is the talk of everyone all around the world, through all walks of life. So let's kind of take a step back and what that means to the heart of your question at the enterprise level, and let's kind of bring it back to, the person on the street and how he or she might use it, or the small business owner. So fundamentally, whether it's a large, complex organization or something much smaller, it all goes back to really these kind of core principles of, design thinking and product market fit. Now, for those people who are not in the product business, like, what does that really mean? Well, design thinking is very simple. It's like, am I actually solving a problem? Do I understand what the problem is? And am I creating value for someone else? It's the most unselfish and most empathetic way. Like, do I understand if I build something, are you going to be delighted by it? Is it going to create value for it, for you? And is it something that you're going to use and adopt every day because it's simple, it's easy to use, but at the end of the day, it's doing something for you that fundamentally is making your life better? And in an idealistic world, something you can't live without. So that's kind of pillar number one, design thinking. Pillar number two is, in the vernacular of Silicon Valley and others around the world, it's product market fit. Now, when I take that, let me kind of translate that in a way that I think is more simplified. It's, have I solved a problem? Back to design thinking, okay? Do I have a mature set of technological capabilities that allow me to kind of build something, so that I've solved that problem? Do I have the right data to, create something or a product that ultimately is valuable? Because data, whether it's AI or anything else, like that's the heart of this. And am I not breaking the law? Right?
Important.
A very important part of product market fit. And it's all of those things together, solving a problem, ingredient number one, not breaking the law, ingredient number two, okay? Technological maturity, and data maturity. Those four ingredients are essential. Now, very briefly, like how you put those things together in a way that are in production versus a proof of concept, and how do you ultimately have a go-to-market strategy that allow you to take those things, build a product, sell it, and scale it. It doesn't matter if you're trying to do that in 60 markets, 1 market, 5 market, those are your pillars. Now, the complexity of doing that, it gets non-linear really quickly if I'm trying to do something like in 1 market versus 60, but that's where it just gets really interesting really quick.
2 comebacks on that, actually.
Sure.
Because, so, one, AI, certainly in the case of HSBC, it wasn't necessarily a product in as much it wasn't a tangible product. It was information that you were trying to gather or trying to offer to all of the people inside of the organization. And we maybe will talk about that. But the other part is that no one really knew about it. And so you had to contend with this sort of almost like bringing computers to a company where nobody had ever used a mouse or a keyboard before. And so you were tasked with that challenge of bringing something that nobody really knew about, or if those did know about it, they maybe had some preconceptions or preconceived ideas about it. And also it was information. Your product was information, or would you say that's correct?
Let me take a step back. There, at organizations like HSBC, very publicly, AI and ML have been with those organizations for years. Okay, so well before I came along, there's financial institutions, hedge funds, insurance companies, people who deal with markets, and again, I'm just kind of speaking in the context of financial services. AI, ML, in whatever way you want to contextually define it at a moment of time, has been in the financial services space for decades. And there are professionals, who have done incredible work over decades, not just in my predecessor organization, but others, who have been hard at work in this for a very long time. The difference, I think, now, okay, and it's not to take away the work of any of those longstanding professionals, who've been at this in any organization. I want to abstract this away from, any particular one. It's that, again, I mentioned like this whole barriers to entry, right? And again, right or wrong, like it or not, the reality is like if we were to put a date and a marker on it, the world kind of did change on November 30th of 2022 when ChatGPT landed on everyone's phone. And I think that's, like it or not, we can all say that was a moment of time which was transformative because it democratized and it made very tangible this thing that we now had that we weren't really sure what it could do or what it couldn't do, which really transcended this historic realm where data scientists, model risk, and the practitioners were in these places and spaces where they built amazing complex stuff. But now all of a sudden, if you had a mobile phone, okay, in most parts of the world, you could start doing stuff you could never do before.
Mm.
Okay. So all of a sudden it went from, again, this group of individuals who had spent decades, in markets and capital markets, like building very complex models to, all of a sudden now we've all got this thing.
Mm.
So then the question is like, what do you now do with it? And again, my passion of building things and kind of democratizing them and scaling them and really making sure people are trained to be both effective and ethical in their use. Now you're dealing with a very different, type of strategy where all of a sudden, you've got to figure out how to take this newish thing
Mm.
and kind of create value at a level of scale that hadn't really been done before. Yeah.
And so if we take that, the enterprise,
Yeah.
and the playbook to some degree that you built over those years at HSBC, and we took that and tried to adapt that playbook for smaller organizations who maybe don't have the same level of wealth and resources and people and so on, how do you take that playbook of how to adopt AI across an organization, how to scale it, how to train the organization and apply it to smaller organizations?
Sure. So I think this is where we are all very fortunate in that, whether, you're a 1 to 2 person small business or a global multinational with 250,000 individuals, the access, and then we're going to talk about whether it's effective or not, but the access to learn and use these tools and capabilities is democratized in ways that it was never before. And part of this is there's selfish commercial interests at play by kind of the model builders and the enterprise technology providers. We don't need to name them. I'm sure we can all figure out who they are. Who are trying to do kind of, if you go back a decade, it was the same thing with cloud, right? How can I get as many people onboarded and sticky onto my platforms as possible? And then this is no different. You have a lot of amazing companies, some of which have been with us for a while, some of which are new. But fundamentally, they're trying to create kind of stickiness like with their capabilities. But fundamentally, like the accessibility to all that is now pretty much virtually, in everyone's hand, okay? So this playbook that you speak of, okay, there's nothing new with this. I mean, whether it was, a transformative technology 12 months ago or 12 years ago, how you fundamentally create, stickiness and adoption, that flywheel, okay, that's part of product market fit. You can build an outstanding product, but if no one knows about it, you really haven't achieved that, right? So it's more than just the data, the technology, am I not breaking the law? Am I solving a problem? You have to make sure that from an adoption perspective, the end user, has access to it. They understand what they're doing. They understand how to use it. And they have a series of incentives, positive incentives, good incentives, that, create the desire and the pull for them to start to use it. Absent that, you've created a product that like no one's used. But it does not take, and I think that's really important to kind of draw a line here and say, it does not take the resources of a large, globally complex organization to, adopt and use responsible AI. It just takes a strategy, it takes a plan, and it takes intention to make sure that, you're using it, adopting it in whatever form that might be.
And in terms of the journey, let's say, and this goes for actually all new technologies, but it's a layered approach to some degree. You start at one point and then you learn and then you get to the next point and so on. And so do you think that AI adoption maturity, that AI adoption curve really is similar for the smaller organizations as it is for the larger organizations?
So I think there's a few dimensions here, okay? In any organization, large or small, okay, where N is greater than 1, in terms of the employees, present company perhaps excluded, because you're a self-selected population, you likely have individuals in the organization who are very curious, They're very much ready to try and learn and adopt like the latest thing. They are self-starters when it comes to doing this. We're going to come back to the question of whether they're doing it the right way for productive and responsible outcomes, but hold that thought for a moment. But you have people who are naturally curious who just want to be a part of it. And likewise, you have people who, and there's all these traditional ways that you would kind of break down your workforce in terms of leaders and laggards. I mean, this goes back decades, right? So that's just traditional kind of talent management, okay? So that's number one. Number two is, how do you then, as an enterprise, large or small, okay, whether, again, you're one or two individuals or 20,000, 200,000, like there's certain rules of the road here. You have a brand, like you're selling something, like you have a set of core principles. Like you have to make sure that whatever is being done, AI or otherwise, like is basically adheres to your risk appetite, whether, again, it's one person or 100,000 people. And you have to be very clear and intentional on that. Now, to do that, this kind of gets to your point around layers, okay? Especially if you're a, small, medium, or large enterprise, like you need to kind of baseline everyone's AI literacy. Like they kind of need to know, generally speaking, like why, this is important, why this isn't going away, okay? And why ultimately, like, this is kind of part of the foundation of what's going to happen. And I would call that your level one, your baseline AI literacy.
So the company all speaking, using the same terms, using the same definitions, speaking the same language, referring to the same things.
That's not only helpful, that's a big part of it, but it's also, understanding as much of what it isn't, as what it is. Like, what do I mean by that? Like, it's really helping people understand kind of both what the existing capabilities are, but at a very kind of basic level, but also like what it's not. I mean, there's a lot of, I think, misinformation out there. There's a lot, and you have to make sure people, have an awareness around kind of what the reality is. And I think the most important thing to convey for that baseline literacy is that ultimately the promise of AI, allows for an organization to do what they're doing better. Okay. If you're a bank, large or small, you're fundamentally in the business of taking deposits, lending money, payments, credit cards, mortgages. Like AI isn't a new thing. I don't like walk up to my local branch of Bank X and say, hey, like, help me with my AI. It's providing me with, services, and I would expect to have a world-class delivery of those services. And again, it doesn't have to be banking, whatever your company is. So do you fundamentally understand that AI is an enabler to help you do things better for your customers, right? That's the foundation.
Yeah. And what if, going back to that AI literacy, if you don't have that common ground, like what tends to happen? Like what are the dangers? Like if it's just in a small percentage of the group and the rest are kind of left behind, like what do you think can happen?
Well, there's a few things that can happen. And a few unintended consequences of not having that baseline. So at one level, let's talk about the unintended consequences first. For even the people who, may be those curious-minded who want to adopt, you don't want to find yourself in a hypothetical situation where they're basically taking proprietary company data and plugging it into their personal devices, and trying to do their day job, their work, but not, in an environment that's safe and secure and responsible. So that's kind of, those people, do they understand they have a responsibility to the organization, like not to do it? And that's kind of one example. Another example is, my personal opinion, all this being my personal opinion is, if you have individuals, who are just sticking their head in the sand and saying this too shall pass, I don't think that's the reality like we live in anymore. And I think, it's incumbent upon every organization to kind of bring their workforce along with them to help them, achieve their personal and professional best. My personal opinion, with very probably few exceptions, is that AI is going to impact so many roles that by allowing your employees to kind of put their head in the sand and say this too shall pass, I think you're not only doing a disservice to the customer, I think you're also doing a disservice to them. Because I think as a forward-thinking, responsible organization, you have a duty, and I use that word purposely. You have a duty to make sure that your employees can be successful. I think a part of that is helping them prepare to be the best that they can be, in their future, and just allowing them to have their head in the sand. I don't think is good. So that baseline of AI literacy, I think, helps them understand the why behind this, and I think that's so important.
Any tips on how you get that head out the sand and those individuals that are really like blocking this opportunity?
Number one, you have to meet them where they are. So that means everything from like taking a lot of the technical gobbledygook out of this and making them understand it's fundamental to doing what the company's already doing on a better basis. It's number two, I think, give them data. Some people, the way they absorb this, they might be skeptical because they don't have the data, right? Some people will change very rapidly if you give them, data to help them understand. And I think there is plenty of data and proof points out there as, we sit here in April of 2025 to say, no, this too shall not pass. Like, this is real, and here's some data to kind of show that. And then there's probably a very, very, very small number of individuals who probably just, might resist it, and, that things will happen over time.
Yeah.
I mean, our experience, not common experience, but we've certainly experienced it where not some companies, I'd say more the senior leadership in some companies they really see this as almost like a phase, like a passing phase, that this shall end at some point and things will go back to the way that they were before. And we have actually seen that with some technologies where there was a huge hoo-ha in the beginning of that. You could say 3D printing is a very good example of that. So going back to that thought of, I can't remember who said it, but technologies are hugely overestimated in the short term and massively underestimated in the long term. But I definitely think that there is this feeling out there by some companies from the conversations that we've had that this is going to pass, that it's sort of everyone's very excited about it now, and at some point they'll get bored with it and things will just go back to the way that they were. What would you say to them?
I'm empathetic with that view, but I've seen enough data that tells me and informs me both quantitatively and qualitatively that the benefits to be realized across a range of things from customer engagement to financial impact to actually the mitigation of risk to, all those things, that this is real. And not because it's been proffered up by a self-interested kind of commercial firm that has an incentive to sell you something, but when properly adopted, when you have an educated and informed workforce, and we should kind of come back to those layers of literacy because I think this is a key part of it. Yeah. When you have an educated and informed workforce who is properly using these tools and capabilities, you see demonstrable, measurable benefits that are to be realized. And could I have said that hand over heart at the end of 2022 or early 2023? Not when it came at that point in time to the new generative AI tooling, because I think we were all testing and learning and finding our way. With some of the older stuff, sure. But I think now, again, as we sit here in April of 2025, there's absolutely enough proof points out there, well beyond banking. This isn't about banking. This is just about, kind of, is this stuff real? That if you're, in the C-suite on a board, you should be surrounding yourself with people who are properly and objectively advising you and providing you with these proof points so that you can, basically navigate this. Alternatively, I think some of what you're describing isn't necessarily because a leader, he or she doesn't believe it, but unfortunately, they've seen many examples, where, they might even be moving quickly, but they have all these proof of concepts. They don't realize value. They've spent millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions on technology transformation products, which may or may not have achieved, stated objectives and goals. There's a lot of there's a long trail of tears, to use that unfortunate analogy of transformation projects gone wrong. So I do understand and I do empathize why there is a certain level of skepticism. But again, I think there's enough proof points that when executed correctly with an educated and informed workforce, this isn't going away.
So it seems really that which makes sense, the driving factor behind this is actually that the value to be realized is huge, whether in productivity gains or in increased output or even better quality output, not just the quantity of that.
Yeah.
And that's something that maybe we haven't seen since maybe computers were introduced into the workplace.
Yeah, and I think, it's hard to measure that. It's getting easier to measure it, but it's hard to measure it. And we'll kind of come back to, I think, a simple thought exercise, in a moment that it might help illustrate the point for the non-technologists like listening today. But before we do, I want, because I think it's important to kind of just ground out that AI literacy point, because we talked about kind of that baseline AI literacy, which is ingredient number one and important because you kind of normalize, again, whether you're a small, medium, or large organization, kind of everyone's understanding. And it also really helps them understand what the view of the firm is, in terms of this, so there's no ambiguity. Then there's this level of training where, okay, like the company with a partner or maybe internally, they've built this thing, like, this capability, okay? And it has to kind of connect to the daily tasks that an employee is doing. They have to fundamentally understand, and by the time it gets to them, it has to be proven, it has to be tested, it has to be, stress tested so that when they're actually using it, it's going to work as expected. Now, assuming that's the case, you can't just rock up one day and be like, here's a new thing, like, have at it. Adoption doesn't work that way. Like, the individual in question, needs to know how to use this stuff. I keep using the same phrase, but both effectively and ethically. Like, there's expectations here, there's investment here, there's a return here. And if you position it the right way with the right level of literacy, baseline's been done, but now you have the employee and he or she, is now using this capability in the context of their job each and every day, which allows you to measure the outcome and realize the goal. It's kind of part of that flywheel. And I think that's the part that's missing a lot, both in terms of the AI literacy and learning space. It's really kind of closing that circle of that flywheel when it comes to adoption. All that baseline literacy is out there, but now, once someone actually has a capability in front of them, do they actually know how to use it every single day, and are they delighted by the experience?
How much reliance do you put on the tech vendor versus the customer? Like, should the tech vendor be doing more to help with the adoption? Do you see that it's somewhere they should play more, or are they doing a good job?
I mean, there's a spectrum, as you would imagine. It's a partnership, as you'd imagine. But fundamentally, okay, it's the responsibility of the organization, okay? And yes, they're spending a lot of money doing that, and it's easy to say it's the vendor. But if I'm, in a privileged position, at an organization where I'm making a decision to bring in this capability, maybe I'm buying it, maybe it's a blend of buy and build, or maybe forget even about the vendor, it could be a pure play in-house build. At the end of the day, as a business leader, I'm still responsible for making sure that my benefits are realized. I'm still responsible for making sure that I've got, users, who are happy, who are using it, and that I'm getting out of it what I want. So I would abstract your question at a different level, and I'd say, it almost doesn't matter if it's a tech vendor or a hybrid or a pure play in-house. is there a rigorous adoption plan in place so that ultimately whatever the thing is that's been built, okay, is being used at levels, sustainably, that it's kind of creating value? And can I point to very specific tangible plans, which increasingly are literacy plans, so that that end user, is using it as expected? But not to avoid the spirit of your question, I think some, and we're not going to use names, but I do think some technology vendors think it's okay to just say, here you go, here's the thing, great, and after sales kind of falls off a cliff. Others are far more engaged and incentivized to make sure that customer success is realized, and they will be with you day 1, day 100, day 180 to kind of make sure that the thing that you're using is being properly used. It just varies.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. So let's delve a little bit deeper into this, the flywheel,
Sure.
the AI maturity curve, the journey. So we've spoken about, let's say, the first part, which is the AI literacy.
Yeah.
And you can argue then adoption it's almost the last part. That's when you become an AI first organization to some degree, where it's adopted across the entire organization. You've got these platforms that are being used, but the bits in between, I mean, when we speak with our clients, we talk about the AI literacy, and then we talk the next phase being the enablement and training, as you were saying, that part when you're actually practically using prompt engineering, using it for your everyday work. And then that third part being the discovery. Where in the organization could we be using it? What are the use cases? My particular role, where can I use AI to transform what I do in this part? And then that fourth bit being the real execution of that, taking those use cases and building them out, potentially through agentic solutions or just AI solutions. And so what's your opinion on that journey? How do you see that journey? Do you put it into those distinct steps?
So this is a tough one right now because the capabilities are advancing so quickly. And a few moments ago, I mentioned kind of this example as a thought exercise. Let me kind of bring it to life right now. So some of the more recent and advanced large language models that have been brought to market, there's been research papers that have publicly stated that they've either passed the Turing test, right?
Yes.
And or through various industry standard benchmarks and evaluations, they have the equivalency of master's and or PhD level expertise. Now, we'll come back to whether or not that's relevant at the task level, but the reality is some of these capabilities now, through objective measurements and standards, are very intelligent and can do lots of things. So let's do a thought exercise. So the three of us have a small business, here on the high street, okay? And, we're, in the business of, kind of content creation, okay? So, we've been in the marketing and content creation. I'm just making this up as I go along, but we've been in this business for like 10 years. All of a sudden, okay, knocking on our door, okay, is the equivalent of basically 10 PhDs, okay, who said, hey, like, I want to work with you. I want to help you grow your business. What can I do? I can start tomorrow. Most of us, we wouldn't know where to begin. What do we do with them? Like, can we actually put them to work? Like, is this legal? Like, I mean, there's a lot of things. So this is what effectively a lot of organizations, large or small, are facing. You now have, and by the way, in that same scenario where you have 10 PhDs knocking on your door, they're also knocking on your neighbor's door. They're knocking on. Why is that? Because again, the barriers to entry have come down. I'm grabbing as my phone is here. We all have access to this level of intelligence, on our mobile devices. Now it's a question of, we have access to this intelligence. Okay, how do we take that, even with literacy, how do we take that and create value? How do we use that, right? And I think this is the dilemma, is because these capabilities are getting smarter and smarter and smarter. And our ability to kind of take that intelligence and convert it and use it into the tasks that a business does each and every day is getting harder and harder and harder, just because the innovation curve is going, so fast.
I love that.
Yeah.
Actually, I love the way you've just described that. You once said something to me that really struck home. It's that having AI is almost like having a Ferrari, and where people don't really know how to drive yet, and they're being given a Ferrari. And the way you've just described it is that not only do they not know what to do with that Ferrari, but they are being given faster and faster cars on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And they haven't even managed to figure out that first car that they were.
No disrespect to Fiat,
Yeah.
but it's like, I may only know how to drive, the Fiat around the track. And yet when I've come around for that lap the first time, I now have something that's probably 10x faster.
Yeah.
And then I've driven around the lap again, and waiting for me now is something that's 10x faster than that. And the cycle kind of continues. And it's really, really hard because, again, if you go back to those core pillars of product market fit, okay, you have like what ideally is a Venn diagram where all these things kind of come together. But a lot of I would dare I say most organizations just don't know how to contend, right, and operationalize in production grade services like this level of intelligence right now to kind of create beneficial value for teammates, for customers, for shareholders. And that's a challenge. I would argue, personally, you could rewind the clock to mid-2024, late 2023, and the most state-of-the-art frontier LLMs were available at that point in time. It would take years and years and years to even maximize their value, let alone the stuff that gets released last week, today, tomorrow, just because operationalizing it for productive value, it's so hard to do anyway. I wouldn't know what to do with a 2,000 horsepower Ferrari. I would drive it right off the course.
Need more driving instructors, right?
Well, it's more than that, because it's great to have a driving instructor, but are there speed limits, right? Yeah. I mean, there's laws here, and again, one of those 4 pillars of do not break the law, do not break your enterprise risk, kind of standards, right? Do you have a risk management framework that's fit for purpose for, to keep the car analogy going, a 150 horsepower Fiat or a 1,500 horsepower Ferrari? If your enterprise risk framework is only fit for purpose for this, circa 2023, but you're trying to operationalize an advanced agentic PhD equivalent here, you've got a delta that just can't be bridged.
It's this delta. I mean, you've got this car. Can the track manage the car? Are the engineers around the track able to fix the
It's
car?
a system.
It seems like the car is just going faster and faster, and all of the system and all of the areas around it haven't caught up. And I mean, to me, it sounds like what you're saying, that they won't catch up. How can they? The rate of evolution of this technology is faster than the rate that people are able to learn it.
Well, this is the, I'll pretend I'm an unfortunate economist for a moment and say it depends. Right. Okay. And this is where there's going to be this increasing divergence. And I may misattribute the author, but I think it was, William Gibson, who said, the future is already here. It's just unevenly distributed. Mm-hmm. You're going to have individuals, right, who have access, again, pick up your phone, right, to an unparalleled level of intelligence and what they can do every day, okay? You're going to have organizations, this is well beyond banking, who are very, very advanced and transforming their enterprise risk frameworks and their ways of working and their talent to take as much advantage as possible, and they will advance how they serve their customers. And then you'll have other organizations, that are going to be, significant laggards. All of those things can be true at the same time. And I think that's the challenge where, if let's take quantum computing. I know this is about AI, but you take quantum. Like today, like we don't all have quantum computers in the palm of our hands or in our garages, at home, right? So the barriers to entry are still very, very, very high. Like there's very few players in industry and government and defense that can use quantum computing. That's not the same with AI anymore.
True.
Okay. And this is this delta that I think everyone in the industry is still trying to deal with.
Would you, looking at different sectors and knowledge workers, of course, there are the concept of a knowledge worker varies across sector. Which sectors do you think are, let's say, ripe for AI to have a large transformational impact on?
Sure.
But are not actually, for very good reasons maybe, but are not really going into it?
Okay. My personal opinion is and by the way, there's a great, because there could be a lot of debate around what is a knowledge worker. I actually think the World Economic Forum has a really good, non-controversial general definition of a knowledge worker, which could apply to many, many different industries. So what I would do, I would basically take that or any other commonly agreed definition and say, what are those industries or sectors where most of the people doing most of the things kind of fit within that? And do you have the types of AI capabilities out there that are fit for purpose, that have been evaluated and can do that? Law, right? I say this as a very, very, very reformed attorney from a long, long time ago. But if you fundamentally look at what a lawyer and or his or her partners, do within a legal ecosystem, their day-to-day is, the business of understanding knowledge, analyzing knowledge, abstracting knowledge, and kind of creating it and synthesizing in new, different, and better ways to better serve, their customers. Okay. So for me, there's clearly a lot of products out there that are kind of working to have product market fit within the legal industry. That said, I think, the legal profession, one of many, but if it's specific to like knowledge workers, right? We should also talk probably like software development. That's a whole other animal.
Yes.
But for knowledge workers, I would make the argument right now, risk averse as many lawyers are, and I understand that. The capabilities are there once you have the knowledge and the literacy to be effective and ethical. I would expect to see within law or even kind of consulting, adoption, which ultimately can serve customers, in a better way.
And do you think that there's going to be the situation that you mentioned before, the sort of haves and the have-nots, or the winners and the losers?
Yeah.
Do you think that law is potentially going to be one of those industries where you see the disruption happening because of the fact that some companies are potentially not adopting AI or are late to the game? And actually, that part of that question is now the right time for them?
Yes. Yesterday was the right time for them.
Interesting.
Yeah, yesterday was the right time. And why do I say that? Not just glibly. I think that if I'm in that privileged position of leading a law firm, I've waved my my magic wand. I have an obligation, a duty, again, intentionally using that term, to understand how to better serve my clients, my customers, okay, by providing them with effective advice. I'm not a lawyer anymore, but I think we all intuitively know what the business of law is. Can I provide them with high quality advice, at a fair price? Interesting that we'll have to come back to that in a moment, right? Yes. With great service as well. I've seen enough in terms of more recent generative AI capabilities that tells me and informs me both quantitatively and qualitatively where law firms sit upon terabytes, of data, of precedent and case law, that the maturity already exists, for the capabilities to kind of create great value. And that could be in the form of faster response times. That could actually be, dare I say, like lower costs.
Yes.
That could be the composition of a workforce within a law firm. And if you re-envision certain roles within a law firm, you're still going to have unbelievably well-trained, like subject matter experts, who have spent decades kind of like learning this, and that will not be replaced. But how are you surrounding, those experts with both human, right, and AI-based assistance so that they can deliver those services, faster, better, and dare I say sometimes, cheaper, ultimately to kind of scale their business against the competition. So,
I mean, you can start to see how even the way that law firms charge could start to change based on time now. And is it potentially on outcome? I know there's been a lot of discussion with AI on AI tools themselves charging based on the outcome, because you have all that data, you have the ability to measure it.
Yeah.
Do you think that that's potentially something that will happen to law?
If I could quadruple my business as a law firm, maintain my level of quality, okay, go to market, with a fair and competitive price, based upon what I've built, over time, I just don't see how ultimately the customer is better served by a lower price point, higher quality, still with that level of expertise, because now, again, you have this hybrid workforce of human and AI that allows you to be faster compared to a more traditional firm, that is still manually looking up precedent, manually looking up case law, sending people down to the call, like whatever it might be. I just don't see like how those two business models, kind of coexist over the long term. Over the short term, fine. But over the long term, I think most customers are going to gravitate to a service provider, in this case, we're talking about a law firm, who's going to provide them with great advice at a great fair price, with a great customer service. And that to me is kind of a long-term trend. I don't see that's avoidable. Yeah.
Fascinating. Okay, let's move on to another subject. I want to chat a little bit more about the general world of AI. Now, something that always interested me, you have met some of the leaders, the frontier of AI, and I mean, maybe you'll mention some of their names, but I'd like to get a sense from you, because you personally met them, you've spoken to them. Where are they? What makes them such thought leaders in this space?
Yeah.
And do you agree with their
Yeah.
thoughts towards where things are going?
Yeah. So one could go to my LinkedIn feed to go to kind of see those examples where I've been privileged enough to kind of meet with industry luminaries. I've never been so nervous as to candidly like to be in their presence. If you want to talk about imposter syndrome,
Yes.
that I'm textbook example on that. Sitting in some of those spaces and places. That said, I've been in a fortunate enough position to directly interact, or at least observe, kind of interaction, with many of those leaders. My armchair, take on it is all of them have just this incredible passion and energy, and unwavering, unwavering desire to build something that, to their vision, and it is very much in many cases their vision. Okay, they are bringing the company kind of, with them. Yes, they have a board. Yes, they have shareholders. Yes, they have customers, but they have a clear and unambiguous vision and a passion and an intensity that is unavoidable. Okay, it is black and white. Like, what it is. Okay. And they want to help you get there. They want to help you achieve your outcomes and your goals. but this is the way that they feel that they can kind of add value to it. And you walk away from those meetings both inspired and exhausted, at the same time. But again, that common thread I see from them is that they are unwavering in their purpose, in their desire, to kind of do very specific things, to kind of, in some cases, at the scale of changing the world, which is a very, very interesting thing to observe at some point as a mere mortal in their presence.
Any standouts? Any particular characters that you thought,
Um,
wow, you're particularly impressed?
I mean, look, again, just because it's publicly there and you can see it in my LinkedIn feed. I mean, Jensen Huang at NVIDIA. Everything you've read or heard or seen about him. I mean, just absolutely incredible, inspirational. Just once in a lifetime, experience that I'll never forget. Michael Bloomberg, as well. So yeah.
Cool.
EJ, you've been in this space a long time, as we've spoken about, and I get asked this question by friends because they know that I'm in the AI space and really looking at the next generation. Where would you advise them? Your kids, for example. What would your advice be to them? Which subjects to go into? Which ones to stay away from? Maybe what areas?
Or to the parents of those children.
Or to the parents. It's something, funny enough, I get asked quite often.
Yeah.
And I think it's driven by a lot of anxiety from parents, not knowing what the future is. You used to be able to say, "Oh, go into medicine and you'll have a great career." And I think that is a question mark now.
Yeah.
In many areas. And what would your advice be to the next generation?
So I have 4 kids.
Yeah.
My eldest son, proud of all of them. My eldest son is finishing his 2nd year at Santa Clara University, the heart of Silicon Valley, ironically. Mere hundreds of meters away from NVIDIA.
Yeah.
My eldest daughter, she's about to graduate here. She's going to go to University of San Francisco. And then we have twins that are 13. I would give them all the same advice, particularly my son, who's in the thick of it right now, about to be halfway through his university experience, and my daughter, who's about to kind of go into it. As a parent, I don't think any 17, 18, 19, 20-year-old, I'm now north of 50, we don't know what we want to do. Certainly at that age, as you think you do, the world changes around you pretty darn quickly. So, number one, the skill you have to have, regardless of kind of your educational pedigree, okay, you have to be resilient, which means you have to suffer through failure, okay? You have to learn from that failure, pick yourself up. But resilience is more than a word. It's a skill. That's number one. Grit, okay? Not giving up, okay? Especially, going back to the conversation we just had about some of these industry titans I'm privileged to be around. I'm sure along the way, there were people who were skeptical of what they were doing, their strategy, but they had a passion, a belief, and an intensity. And that doesn't mean that they were, maniacally focused and not kind of absorbing new facts and course correcting, but there was a grit there, okay, not to give up. Again, this isn't about maths or psychology. It's you got to be resilient, you got to have grit, okay? And you got to have a practical level of experience. Okay, and I'll talk about what I mean by that in the context of AI in a second. So I think those 3-ish things, and I would add a 4th, is empathy. Okay, because at the heart again of that design thinking, especially if you want to build things, you fundamentally have to be empathetic. You can't be selfish. You have to understand how to solve a problem for someone else. You have to put yourself in their shoes. This is the heart of, IDEO and Stanford at the design school and D-thinking. Been replicated all around the world. But fundamentally, at the heart of building a great product is empathy. So resilience, learning from your failure, grit, not giving up, empathy, all those things, and the experience. On the experience one, I think one can, as a parent, you can discuss and dispute, but the age. But I think, once you've got a teenager, maybe even, you should figure out a way to have them in a way that's, responsible and age appropriate. Like, start to build their own AI agents right now. Okay, what do I mean by that? Okay, I pay a little bit of money every month, to OpenAI personally, okay, to have a team kind of subscription that is for me, my kids, and my family. What do we do with that? Okay. So my youngest son, we were talking about cars, ironically, we built, together, very simple to do, kind of a digital agent, that was on, classic cars and all these things, teaching him some basic prompt engineering. So he's built a digital agent. Okay.
Cool.
Now, for those of you who are hearing this and thinking I can't do that. Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can. You don't even need to spend any money to do it every month. It's in the palm of your hand. Giving your children the gift of your time, and learning even with them. I'm learning with him, right? To me, him having that experience, and I've taken his passion and I've basically said, here's the thing you can do. I've taken my youngest daughter, we've done something similar, and with the older two as well. Now, when it gets into university, it gets a little bit more, challenging. So the advice I'm giving my eldest son is look, at this point in time, I wouldn't go in the computer science as it's designed today. I'd learn as much as you can about ethics and responsible AI. Fortunately, his university has just launched a minor in responsible AI, which is cross-disciplinary. I said, you coming out of this, you're not going to be a coder, because I think the fundamental nature of that's going to change. But if you start to understand kind of the ethics around this stuff, the responsible AI piece, to be able to teach and learn and train, I think those are skills, that are going to be, kind of lifelong. But it's tough. I don't have the answers. I just have gut. I have, things I'm hearing. I'm talking to other parents in this space. We all have the anxiety. We all do. It's okay to be anxious about it. It's okay to acknowledge it. But yeah, this is, I think, a real challenge for the educational systems writ large, to figure out how to take this thing and create great students and leaders and teammates of the future. Yeah.
Interestingly, on that sort of crossing back into the discussion around law, that one thing we certainly see with AI is that it can do the roles of the more junior people in organizations.
For now.
For now. And the question that I have, and I don't know the answer to, is how do you get to be the expert? A barrister in the UK or a lawyer in the US. If AI does the job of the junior lawyer and even the mid-level lawyer, how do you get to make those mistakes, as you were saying, if
You're right.
if you can't actually get to that journey?
That's right.
What is the
This
answer
is a
to
big
that?
problem, and it's a big challenge. Whether it doesn't even have to be law, but it's if you look at any expert in their field, he or she has spent years, decades, kind of building upon that experience that they have to be who they are today, in whatever field it might be. Okay, but if you're in the knowledge worker space, lawyers and more, okay, all of a sudden now, over a period of the next, few years, you've got this thing now that has basically short-circuited that entire process and has gone from apprentice, year 1 to year 20, SME, in a matter of 12 months, 18 months. Again, I would go back to the fact that there's, certain public benchmarks out there, which seem to indicate some of the latest large language models have PhD or multi-PhD intelligent equivalency.
Amazing.
There's no curve with that. It's like that.
Yeah.
And this is the challenge. I think that we have both practically PhDs knocking at your door,
Mhm.
and philosophically, like, what do we do with, not only people who've been in the workforce for a long time, but what do we do? What obligation, what duty do we have to the younger generations to make sure that they're not completely like disintermediated by the PhD who's knocked up that costs the equivalent of, 5,000, pounds a year?
Mhm.
That's a tough one.
Mhm.
That's a question society kind of needs to have a conversation with itself about. Yeah.
And maybe a good place for us to say thank you.
Sure.
This has been incredible. And really, as one of the early pioneers in this space, your view on this is just so interesting to listen to. I will finish, however, on one last question, which is this: that if you were to give advice to a company now,
Mm-hmm.
just starting out on their AI journey,
Yeah.
and they've got so much that they need to think about,
Yeah.
just some of the subjects that we've touched on today. But what's the one piece of advice that you would give them?
Okay. At the heart of AI are your people. Okay. And don't forget the fact that at the end of the day, like, your people are the connection to the value that you create now and in the future, the customers that you have now and in the future. And that doesn't necessarily mean just in customer facing, but everyone in your organization. Okay. Principle 1, do not forget your people. Principle number 2, okay, is provide them. You have a duty and an obligation, okay, no matter how you look at it, to make your people the best that they can be so that they can be the best that they can be. And you can only do that through effective literacy and training, okay? And the third thing is, within your organization, you have to recognize that you're going to have some people that are on that leading edge, and some who are going to be laggards. That's okay. That's normal and natural. You've got to figure out how to kind of normalize that so that when you build practical things, and that's the last element of this, okay, don't go out there and try and do, 1,000 different things. Don't get kind of lost in the volumetric. Like, focus on a small number of practical things that in the context of your business, in the context of your people, will create value, but also demonstrate to them, that there's value in it for them to learn, that there's a positive incentive to be part of this vision and this future. Because if they feel somehow threatened that AI is now, being part of, this, it's coming for them, they may not want to be a part of that. And ultimately, your business, your customers, the value creator are going to suffer. So do this in a way where your teammates, your employees are very much a part of that, and I think all of those ingredients together create a great recipe for success. That wasn't one
Perfect.
thing, but you have to look at it as this entire kind of set of ingredients to be successful.
Good advice. Thank you.
Thank you, EJ.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Cheers.
And that brings today's podcast episode to an end. Stay tuned for our next installment.